Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn@pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hello. Welcome. I want to thank the person who sent me this bumper sticker. I graduated Trump University. Thank you very much. And welcome to another Monday. And as you can see, it's a Monday. I am totally discombobulated. It is the, whatever the hell, the 11th. Jesus. That means 2 weeks till Christmas. Kind of, right? Yeah, it does. By the way, we will be here for the next 2 weeks, and then we will take the week between Christmas and New Year's off, because after 500 years in this business, it finally dawned on me that is a really lousy week to work. Because, first of all, no one else seems to be. Secondarily, people are not following their usual schedules. So there's, and even news people decide to stop covering news. So there's no news. Although in this day and age, there's never no news, as we know. The news is constant. Latest news, speaking of constant, is, of course, this totally sophomoric, mucked up terrorist attempt in the New York City subway this morning. The good news being nobody seriously injured at all. The 3 bystanders who were slightly injured transported themselves to hospitals. And the perp is alive and probably talking. And he's 26 years old, I guess, 26, 27 years old. They were holding a news conference, and he's alive. He will talk. He obviously, he had a pipe bomb on him, and didn't whatever the hell, nothing much happened. Has the president tweeted yet? He has? I don't think so. I'd be shocked, but I don't think he has. And speaking of the president tweeting, my Lord, did you guys read? It's an interesting read. It was a front page in Sunday's New York Times, and it was a report done after numerous New York Times reporters interviewed over 60 people. He just tweeted about. What? He just tweeted about that. He just tweeted about the story in the New York Times.
Yes. Sent it over to you.
Oh, but not. He just tweeted about that. Well, Donald, good timing, dearie, because I was just about to talk about it myself. He tweeted this: another false story. This time in the failing New York Times, that I watch 4 to 8 hours of television a day. Wrong! Exclamation point. Also, I seldom, if ever, watch CNN or MSNBC, both of which I consider fake news. I never watched Don Lemon, who I once called the dumbest man on television. Bad reporting. Your president is up and doing his presidential duties as he sees them. The report he's responding to, which we will assume is factually correct, as opposed to the president's tweet, which we will assume is not, did say that he watches 4 hours of television every day. I mean, that's the norm. On some days, he can watch as much as 8 hours. The TVs are always on. Now, sometimes, even when he's having a big meeting, the TV will always be in the room and on. The president's eyes always directly across from the television, and it might be on mute, but he's reading the scrolls. So 8 hours, they'll give him the benefit of the doubt and just say 4 hours a day. He's an early riser, says it's up about 5:30, usually is tweeting by 6. He tweets propped up on pillows in the presidential bed. Sometimes he manages to get out of bed and wander into the treaty room where he might have a meeting or two in his pajamas. This is a story that's just mind-blowing. They interviewed 60 of his advisors, associates, friends, and members of Congress, most of whom, of course, said, I'm only doing this anonymously. But I thought the most interesting thing about it, and let me see if I can find it. Surely, you know, I'm going to fire myself. That's what I'm going to do. If I worked for me, I'd be gone. Absolutely incapable of getting a pretty simple job right. Like when you when you rip stories out of the paper and highlight certain parts, make sure Lynn has them when she goes to work. Jesus H. What a bumbling. Getting rid of her. I'm getting rid of her. All right. So I can't find it. But he did say this. It says, and we know this is true because it's the way he operates. For Trump, every day is an hour-by-hour battle for self-preservation. That's all this presidency is about. And it ain't about the country. It ain't about what is best for the people of the United States. It ain't about holding true and fast to his oath of office. It is about self-preservation. And that's it. And he even went so far as before taking office, informing his staff, actually his top aides, okay, the top people surrounding him, that they were to think of each day in the White House as an episode in a television show. Now, this reminds me, I did see the Turner Classic Movies is tonight at 8 showing Being There, which is the Peter Sellers movie about a totally empty-headed human being seen as somehow brilliant and presidential and, making it in all likelihood to the White House. It's wonderful. So if you've never seen Being There, it especially takes on all kinds of new meaning when you're viewing it from the perspective of a human being living in these times, in these United States of America. So he tells his top aides, you are to look at every day here as an episode in a television show. And this is a TV show in which he the Donald, vanquishes foes on every episode. Now, understanding that he actually said that to top aides, one can see why the tweets, why he says what he says, how he perceives the job. Self-preservation, in which he is the hero, and every day you need to just look at it as an episode on a TV show where the hero gets the bad guys. All right. Well, if you haven't read the whole thing, go for it. But the odds are you already know pretty much the way this works, right? Unbelievable. Roger writes, contrary to what I just saw on TV. Oh, this is a presidential tweet that Roger's come up with. Contrary to what I just saw on TV, I don't watch TV. Contrary to what I just heard reported on CNN, I never watch CNN. That's why I'm responding almost within seconds of what is on CNN. By the way, they've also found through polling and stuff that Don Lemon, who has the 10 o'clock show on CNN, 10 p.m., is the most hated CNN anchor. And I ask you, why? This is among Trump supporters. Why? I'll give you a hint. No, I won't. Don Lemon. He is, of course, black. That was the hint. And what else? Trying to keep you up to date here, despite my associates' inability to get me. Geez, you know what? Obit of the day, the former Romanian king, King Michael, has died. He was 96. And I have a picture of me with this guy. He's sitting on a bench with his lovely wife, and I'm behind him, grinning. I spent an hour or so with him one day. It's a long story. But he seemed like a nice guy, and I was sorry to see that he's died. He had a hell of a life, I'll tell you that. You wouldn't necessarily want to have lived it. I'm trying to figure out how to tell you this story. He was credited with saving thousands of lives during World War II. When he was 22 years old, and he was on the throne, but he was on the throne while a Nazi puppet really had all of the power. That guy was named Antonucci, I believe. And he was the fascist dictator of Romania. And on August 23rd, 1944, when the young King Michael, who really had no power, summoned the fascist dictator to his office, or to the throne room, and he dismissed him. I mean, wow. He really didn't. He was a king, and he said, you're out of here. Because it was generally perceived that his, being a king in Romania at that time with a Hitler crony sitting at top of the government, that the king was really nothing more than a figurehead and was to keep his mouth shut. And the bravery it would have taken for this 22-year-old guy to summon this fascist to his office and to say, I'm relieving you of your duties. And then he had him arrested. That's pretty brave. He renounced then Romania's ties to the Axis powers. And historians sometimes will argue about it, but some say his action may well have shortened the war by months because it allowed for a quick Soviet takeover of Romania rather than a battle about it. And then as Romania, because the Russians took it, started devolving into a communist dictatorship from the fascist dictatorship, the king tried mightily to hang on to the constitutional monarchy that he headed, but the Russians were having none of that. He was forced at gunpoint to abdicate and to exit the country quickly. So there was this, he lived in a pretty incredible life. You know what's weird about him? I remember when I met him, I thought, God, look at this. He looks almost exactly like Queen Elizabeth's father. He really did. He had the same. And then you realized they were all cousins. He would have been, I think, first cousins with the Queen. And he looked like, I've never put their two pictures together, like taken around the same age, but I am willing to bet these two look like twins. Anyway, I'm sorry he's gone, but had a lovely afternoon with him in outside of, I don't know where the hell was Zelianople. Don't ask. Tom writes, Don Lemon is not only black. He's gay! You're right! Oh my God! Oh, the embodiment of Satan himself. A gay black man on CNN. Excuse me. Clearly an indication of the end times being upon us. E.J. Dionne, today's Washington Post, wrote a piece that I could have written. Only mine would have been slightly more hysterical. But he and I see things the same way. And I will share just some of what he says in the Washington Post today. Our democratic republic is in far more danger than it was even just a few weeks ago. I mean, if you've been paying attention, you would know this. Until this point, says Dion. There was an underlying faith in much of the political world, a faith, by the way, not shared by me, that if Robert Mueller's investigation turned up unmistakably damning material about the president, Republicans in Congress would feel obligated by their commitment to the country and its well-being to accept Mueller's findings and then challenge, turn on, impeach, whatever, you name it, the president. Much as what happened in the Nixon era. Republicans in Watergate were very slow, as they certainly are now, to acknowledge that something pretty seedy had gone on and that the president and his aides were committing felonious acts in an effort to cover up their crime. And at some point, when the evidence stacked up, they turned on him. They turned on Nixon. And so a lot of people have been assuming that this would happen again, that we had not drifted so far from decency, as Dion puts it, that the kind of patriotism, love of country over party and power, would, as it had evidenced itself in Watergate, evidence itself again in this Trumpian era. But Dion said anybody who watched the House Judiciary Committee last week grill the FBI director, you couldn't look at it and think that these guys were going to ever turn on this president. Here's what Dion says. It is not surprising that Trump and those on his payroll want to protect him at all costs. One Republican after another in this hearing attacked Mueller and the FBI as if the FBI should be placed on a new list of known subversive organizations. Here were all these Republicans, and they were grilling the head of the FBI, not with the usual deference Republicans have always shown top law enforcement officials, but rather as if he were a member of ISIS. Dion points out especially that wonderful exemplar of what has happened to the Republican Party, namely Representative Louis Gohmert of the great state of Texas. He actually was naming names of FBI investigators and asking, after naming each name, if he knew if that particular investigator was a Hillary Clinton lover. He's naming names of FBI and saying, is he or is he not? Was he or was he ever? It's exactly like McCarthy asking for commies. To your knowledge, has FBI agent, fill in the blank, ever been a member of the Communist Party. No, now the question has changed to likes Democrats. He went through a list. It was exactly like the House Un-American Activities Committee. Only this was the FBI. Also, said, never mind. The rationale for this assault by the Republicans on the FBI is, of course, to undermine the investigation that Mueller is pursuing that is getting frighteningly close to the Oval Office. And if they can, as they are intending to, with the help of Fox News and all the other right-wing media outlets, to besmirch Mueller, then they don't have to give any credence to what his investigation comes up with, even if it's treason, even if it's collusion by the Trump campaign with the Russians prior to the election, or any little machinations that came immediately after he ascended to the Oval Office. I'll finish with what Dion finishes. Only recently it was widely assumed that if Trump fired Mueller, many, many Republicans would rise up to defend our institutions. Now, many in the Republican Party are clearly laying the groundwork for justifying a cover-up. And this is a recipe for lawlessness. We also assumed that Mueller's findings would be respected because of his deserved reputation for fairness and independence. Earlier this year, it was about 6 months ago, Newt effing Gingrich called Mueller, quote, a superb choice to be special counsel and praised his honesty and integrity. And now, if you've heard what Gingrich is saying now, it is the exact opposite. Trump himself said quite plainly on Friday in Pensacola that he will do whatever it takes to hold power. That should send chills. I mean, I'm sorry. If that doesn't send chills down your spine, that is not the statement of an American president. Unfortunately, it is. But never before would an American president say such a thing. That is a statement of a tyrant. That is a statement of a czar, a Führer, a Putin. No president of the United States would say such a thing, that whatever it takes, he will hold power. And here's what he said. Quote, Donald Trump in Pensacola. There are powerful forces in Washington trying to sabotage our movement. These are bad people. These are very, very bad and evil people. But you know what? We're stopping them. You're seeing that right now. That an American president uttered those words just this weekend is frightening and tells us that, as Dion says at the end, we are far closer to the edge than we want to think. So watch it as it happens. The Republicans now actively working so that if Mueller comes up with further indictments that would totally destabilize this presidency, the Republicans will dismiss it. Or if this president fires Robert Mueller, the Republicans who control this Congress will aid and abet what will begin to be very much a coup d'etat. I remember during Watergate, I was a young married woman, and I remember saying to my husband, I'm really afraid. I'm afraid that Nixon will seize power. That as this gets closer and as people start turning on him, that we're going to see something we never have seen before, that he is the commander-in-chief, that he will take the military and will seize power. And I said that not in a vacuum. I said that as somebody who just 4 or 5 years earlier had lived in Chicago and had taken the elevated train, from my apartment in Evanston into the city to visit my great aunt. I got out at my usual stop where I would walk over to her apartment, and she lived in a nice area where all the fancy stores were, where the water tower was, the supposed building that withstood the Great Chicago Fire. And as I walked right in front of the water tower, if I turned my head to the right, I saw a sight that chilled me to the bone. On the corners of Michigan Avenue were tanks. And they had barbed wire on the front. And there were soldiers with big guns standing around in front of the friggin' Walgreens. And the cognitive dissonance in my head was overwhelming, because I'd seen pictures like that of troops and tanks on beautiful boulevards. But they were pictures from Prague and Budapest and Berlin and Poland. They were pictures from countries behind the then Iron Curtain. They were pictures that you would only see in a totalitarian country, not in the United States of America. And I remember running to her apartment, and she didn't calm me down either. She was terrified too. These were the days right before the Democratic Convention of 1968. So I'd seen already when I told my husband I was afraid that Nixon was going to essentially seize power rather than leave. And I had reason to fear. I'd already seen things in the very recent past that didn't look in any way, shape, or form like what I thought my country was supposed to look like. And I have to tell you, looking now at what's happening in Washington, D.C., with the Congress and the president and the verbiage and their enablers in their media, I'm more terrified now. And I've got more living under me now. I've seen more. And I know a lot of Americans have faith that somehow our institutions are going to hold. I'm not saying they won't. I am saying, as Dion said, they might not. And that we are closer to a precipice that we could not conceive of than we think. Call me a doomsayer, but I think I am simply being watchful. I'm listening. I'm taking people at their word. And when the President of the United States says that he will not be removed, when he flat out says he will do whatever it takes to keep power, and when he calls people who oppose him evil, he used the word of the people, that the powerful forces in Washington. He's talking about Mueller. He's talking about the FBI. He's talking about the very institutions of the government which he supposedly leads and swore to defend. And he calls them bad. And he calls them evil. This is a traitor. This is a man actively working overtime to save his own skin and doesn't give a damn if in doing so he takes down this once proud nation. Chuck writes, first, spending 48 hours daily watching television adds up to potentially 28 to 56 hours of television per week. On the low end, he could recover an entire day of his week by turning off the television. And on the high end, he would recover 2 days each week. It doesn't matter. He is, it's sort of like, in again, watch Being There tonight. The idiot there, played by Peter Sellers, Chauncey Gardner is the character's name, also spends most of his time watching television. You can't be productive in any way if that's what you're doing. And Chuck says, secondly, I think his television habits are indicative of some sort of anxiety disorder where he constantly must know what people think of him. Yeah, this is a guy who is probably one of the most insecure human beings on the earth, requiring literally now the world to pay attention to him. He needs to see himself on television. He needs to see people talking about himself, because then I guess he exists or he has some value. But in his deepest, darkest insides, he knows otherwise. People who rise to levels of power, or who are lauded as being, great or incredibly good at what they do, often harbor grave self-doubt. I think that's just normal. I remember my brother telling me, as he just sort of astronomically rose in academia, that he said, I keep worrying that someone's going to find out that I'm just me. Because in his heart, he's just him. He's the, we're all sort of the little kids we were on some level. That's when our very important cores got created, when we're young. And clearly Donald Trump didn't get much love, didn't get much praise. And we're all paying the price. I can't believe that. That's bullshit. Excuse me, I'm talking to something that my producer just sent me. That cannot be true. Yeah. Where is this coming from?
It's a Fox News poll.
The what poll?
Fox News.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Those. Fox News is reporting a poll that shows Democrat Doug Jones leading Roy Moore by 10 points. This, the day before the election. You don't suppose, do you, that Fox News concocted this poll to get every friggin' racist, xenophobe, right-wing, fascist wannabe out of their house tomorrow to vote for Roy Moore when they had been hearing from every other poll that he was well ahead, when they thought, oh my God, our pedophile could lose. Fox. They were always repellent, but they now are simply a blatant purveyor of falsehoods and propaganda for those who would make this country a fascist dictatorship. So that's what they are. And you know what? I'm not overstating that. And if you think I am, then you're not paying attention. This Fox News data says here does not line up with all the other polls that show the pedophile in the lead. It could happen. I haven't given up hope. It could happen that Doug Jones is going to somehow stage an upset. But, let's think about how this race has been covered. Have you ever seen Doug Jones on the news? Maybe once. They haven't covered Doug Jones, media. They've only covered one candidate in this race. So if it's about getting your name out there, Doug Jones can't buy his way onto a newscast. I've never seen a soundbite of Doug Jones on the news. Man, I've seen Roy Moore until I'm... I want you, Stephen, to... to share with us, speaking of Roy Moore, to share with us a little snippet from an interview he did with, I believe, was it the BBC or the Guardian? It's some British paper. And we have audio. And I need this audio to be... I'm sorry, I'm so slow. I'm trying. Give me a break here. Here we are. Come on, baby. Here it is. I don't know how you do that, but there it is. Okay? It's about a little over a minute, and it's something at the end that just blows your mind. Are you able to just put that right on from, okay, guys, this is Roy Moore you're going to hear. He's the one without the British accent. Oh, no, you got to take my, you got to take my case off then. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm moving on. Tom says, I never expected this Congress to impeach Trump. In a much less partisan time of 17 Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee, only 6 voted yes on Articles 1 and 2 of impeachment for Nixon. And 2 votes yes on Article 3. So it wasn't like they all just turned, right? Just rip it apart.
I might break it.
No, you won't break it. In this partisan time, there will be no votes from Republicans to impeach. And Tom says, thanks for the being there, heads up. I've been looking for it for a while. Well, it's on tonight. You really can rip it apart. You can stick something in it and pull it. Rip the friggin' phone apart. Dang it. And Bree writes, cultivation theory looks at the effects of television on its viewers. Most of the negative impacts occur among heavy television viewers. There are several effects, including, quote, mean world syndrome. Heavy television viewing is associated with all kinds of negative effects. Did you get it off? Yeah. Okay, so here is Roy Moore being interviewed by some British journalist.
You have said that Donald Trump was put in the White House by God.
You know, everybody else thinks it's the Russians. I think this is providential hand of God. I think it was by providence that he was placed there, yes.
You were, I assume, a supporter of Ronald Reagan in the 80s. What do you think he would think of the proximity between the U.S. and Russian president right now?
You know, one thing I've learned in politics is not to think for somebody else. And to assess what Ronald Reagan would think, I just couldn't simply begin.
But he said that Russia was the focus of evil in the modern world.
You could say that very well about America, couldn't you?
Do you think?
Well, we promote a lot of bad things, you know.
Like?
Same-sex marriage.
That's the very argument that Vladimir Putin makes.
Well, then maybe Putin is right. Maybe he's more kin to me than I know.
What would you say to him?
Здравствуйте, как вы поживаете сегодня?
Do you believe that? What would you say to Putin? And Roy Moore starts talking Russian. He started talking Russian. Roy Moore, who barely speaks English, started talking Russian. Roy Moore, who in the course of that 1 minute said that while Reagan might have called, Russia the evil empire, or thought of Russia as evil, Roy Moore was quick to say that America is evil, does evil things. Like allow gay people to marry. But that Roy Moore, after all the horrors of what he said, that it's God who put Trump on the throne, it's Roy Moore speaks Russian? Unbelievable. Jenny says, you're right. The media has not covered Doug Jones. Why? Because Doug Jones doesn't sell soap. You're right. He's just a boring, honorable man. That's all. He doesn't wander malls looking for prepubescent girls to molest. The only thing we know about Doug Jones and girls is that even though it was 30 years after those girls were killed by racists, those poor black children, in going to church, that he brought justice to them, even if it was so incredibly belated. That's the only thing I know about Doug Jones and girls. But it ain't sexy. And Jenny reminds us that one of the reasons we have Trump in the White House is because of our media, including the media he loves to hate. Gave him so much free airtime. Covered everything he did. If you added up all the airtime they gave him as opposed to the airtime they gave Hillary, it doesn't even come close. So our media being commercial media, meaning they're in it for the money, not for the mission, for the money. They give coverage to the clowns. They give coverage to the entertainers. Statesmen? Intelligent? Serious people? What? You want our ratings to tank? We have a call. Hello.
Hey, Lynn.
Hi.
Good morning to you,
Hi.
such as it is. It's John from Greensburg, a.k.a. John, I loathe the South, and I don't care who knows it.
Okay.
Don't you understand, and don't your listeners understand, that the failure of the media that covered Doug Jones is really part of the liberal, anti-Trump, anti-Roy Moore bias? Because, Lynn, if they were giving Doug Jones more publicity, that he convicted Klansmen who bombed and murdered, innocent civil rights workers and including African American children, Roy Moore would be 20 points ahead in Alabama. I mean, did you catch so they're doing Doug Jones a massive service by not covering that part of the story. I mean, that would get Alabamians out in droves to vote for Roy Moore. Why, going after those good, God-fearing, patriotic, white nationalist Klansmen who's just protecting the white women folk. Did you get the focus group?
No, I couldn't. I know.
Luntz?
Yeah, I'm aware of it, and you know what? I protect myself. I did not.
40 years ago, it was a different time. 14-year-old, the parents of 14-year-olds were really proud to have an assistant DA in his 30s asking out their daughters.
Right.
40 years ago was 1977. So I guess in Alabama, that must be a different. I'm sorry. I still contend Abraham Lincoln should have been far, far, far harsher on the South. That insurrectionist, apartheid, traitor culture should have been broken. Their culture needed to be broken over the collective knee of the United States.
Well,
it did.
Well,
the fact that there's one statue to traitors like Robert E. Lee is a disgrace to our nation.
Yeah.
Disgrace.
I hear you. Hey, thank you. I have such a headache you
You're
cannot
welcome.
imagine. Bye, John. By the way, Roy Moore, just want to give you another quote from him. He actually said that we would have a better country if we got rid of all of the constitutional amendments after the Bill of Rights. So 11, all the way up, he thinks we would have a better country. I just want to remind you about some of those. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. He apparently would not have been for that. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection. Right. That's a bad one, because then you end up with gays being able to marry eventually. The 15th prevents voter discrimination. Well, how the hell are people like Roy Moore supposed to get elected if you can't mess with the polls? And the 19th Amendment, of course, gave the likes of me a vote. So, yeah, if he wins tomorrow, you might want to question the Lincoln's assessment that to bring the country back together, we had to go easy on the South. Because boy, did we ever. And we allowed them to create this false alternative narrative. So people in the South have been used to living with a revisionist history and lies. And that's why Fox News is the only thing they believe, because they speak the same language. Mark says, I know you may disagree with this, but I'm getting increasingly bothered by the Franken ouster. I don't completely disagree, as you know. He was a scapegoat so that they could take the high road. I mean, so they could say, look what we did to anybody who... That's why he's out. That's why he's out. So I don't... The admitted incident involved a USO tour of which Franken did often. These are not glamorous trips to beautiful places and 4-star hotels. They are low-budget shows to remote places with limited facilities. They're designed for 20-year-old guys away from home and always include sexual references and humor. They totally do. That's why it's always like, even when Bob Hope did it forever and ever and ever, it was Bob Hope and beautiful Hollywood starlets who often were barely clothed. It was for, the boys. And so the woman who accused Franken was one of the women on this tour, and she behaved very sexually toward other performers as well. But, we don't want to get in to any of that, right? And I am so sick of people saying that the photograph shows him with his hands on her breasts. It does not. His hands are not on her breasts. They're like here. He's just mugging for the camera. Anyway, Mark writes, to equate this with the 30-something Roy Moore being banned from malls is ridiculous. But see, one's going to end up in the Senate and the other's been ousted from the Senate. What's the moral of the story that we're learning from the likes of Moore and Trump? Deny. Deny, 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 and keep your office. Franken apologized. He's gone. There's something messed up about that, is there not? Here's a quote from that focus group that John was talking about. 40 years ago in Alabama, there's a lot of mamas and daddies that would be thrilled that their 14-year-old was getting hit on by a district attorney. There was still clothes on. As soon as the girl said she wasn't comfortable, he took her home. Of course, if that had been a black man, he'd be swinging from the nearest tree. Huh? Yeah. Oh, guys, my head hurts. I graduated from Trump University. Grifter. Remember Trump University? Scam artist. Liar. Sexual assaulter. Our president. And enabled by what used to be a reputable national political party. Unbelievable. I'm done. Please don't slit your wrists. Not yet. Bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.